Hello and welcome back to Watching Brief for the month of March 2020. This is the second chunk of the cake, piece of the pie, lump of ice cream that you get this month. In so much as we realised when we were discussing the first big story of the month that actually COVID
The
19.
only story of the month.
No, you see, you say that, but this is the whole reason why there's
I
a
know.
second chunk. Um,
Okay, okay.
we realised that deserved to live on its own as a
Yeah.
sort of its own bulletin sort of format, and instead now we're going to discuss what else happened in March, because there was stuff that was happening in March, and actually crucially, I think it's important to acknowledge that at the beginning of the month, for example, and I do, or I will be talking about this in a moment. Um, COVID really wasn't on the horizon, and there was archaeological news happening, well, as you seem to take great pleasure in, there's a beautiful lead in from I suppose elements of leadership and government ineptitude into the consequences of that in the case of certain large uh, American corporate organizations.
Yes, well, we're dealing with, and hello to our viewer, and especially our viewer who's stuck with us through the whole COVID-19 episode.
Hmm.
This is going to be not quite a COVID free zone, but more as near as damn it as we can make it. No, back at the beginning, earlier on in the month, we had another instalment of the gift that keeps on giving, which is the story of Hobby Lobby, the Green family, who have been giving millions of dollars to artifact dealers selling unprovenanced artifacts. And we've got the latest installment in that exciting saga.
Exactly, it's a gift that keeps on giving, and let's just lead into that now. Then, so enjoy.
And in fact, it is one of our regular stories because it's the latest installment in the saga of the Hobby Lobby. And
Yay!
yes, new readers start here.
Hmm.
The billionaire Green family who run the Hobby Lobby stores in the United States are evangelical Christians, and they started a museum of the Bible
Hmm.
in Washington.
Hmm.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that, obviously, but what there appears to have been a lot wrong with is their procurement of artifacts for the Museum of the Bible,
Yes.
because over the last few years, there have been a catalogue of stories about material that was arriving at the museum where its provenance was, shall we say, opaque. Um,
That's very
or, or,
polite
or
of
in
you.
some cases, or in some cases, actually downright clear it was stolen from Iraq and
Yeah,
Syria and
yeah,
places like that.
yeah. They've
They've
also
already
well,
got.
they've also obviously been recent, a very recent story which we haven't included this month. I think came out this month was the story of them being having been shown to have purchased for fakes in terms of the copy. Fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and over the years they've been involved in a myriad of dodgy, fake, fraudulent, uh,
Allegedly
alleged.
dodgy
Well, no, no, no.
fake
Well,
apples.
actually, no. A lot
So
of
there's
this
some of
has
them is
been
proven, yes.
prosecuted, but anyway.
Good,
But
good.
basically, they don't have a great track record.
That, yeah, yeah, exactly. Yes, putting
Oh,
it mildly, putting it
well,
mildly.
actually, even milder. We have reason to be skeptical of their track record.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
Um,
continue.
well, it's really just to say that the latest saga, the latest in the saga, is that in what I'm sure is well meant,
Hmm.
but in what could also be argued to be a desperate rearguard PR action
Hmm.
to try and make them look less irresponsible in terms of their collecting policy.
Hmm.
Um, they are returning to various, well, primarily to Iraq and to Egypt, 11,500 artifacts.
Yeah.
Now, most of these are fragments of papyrus with ancient texts,
Hmm.
and also uh, tablets, cuneiform tablets from Iraq.
Hmm.
Um, and if I can get the link up.
Well, and the quote is that they are of dubious origin.
Well,
Uh,
the quotes. I mean, this particular article, I have to say that the original story was covered in the Wall Street Journal, and I'm actually quoting here from an ArtNet News summary, which quotes the Wall Street Journal.
mhm.
Um, some of the quotes in it are absolute gems. And I do recommend people who, people have time on their hands at the moment, do go back over the saga of the Hobby Lobby because it is a parable of how not to procure artifacts for a museum in the 21st century.
Well, one of the gems would be I knew little about the world of collecting, Green told the Wall Street Journal last week. The criticism of the museum resulting from my mistakes was justified. He claims to have instituted much stricter protocols governing acquisitions moving forward for both the museum and his personal collection. It's it's well, and that's it. The thing is, and also it should be mentioned as well that this comes at a time when also the Hobby Lobby have been criticised in terms of their ethics when it comes to staying open during a pandemic,
Yes.
supposedly at the behest of the Almighty himself, appearing in a vision to the owner's wife. Um,
I missed that one. Did
Yeah,
you?
no. Apparently, they stayed open, and police have had to shut down stores, particularly in I think Colorado comes to mind. I think that's where. So so that they're a kooky bunch to start to begin with at the very least. But this
They're
idea,
committed to their cause,
they're committed committed to their cause. But in that sense, this
but
idea,
making vast amounts of money.
yes, yes. Well, but in this sense, having such a substantial personal collection, it has been
Yeah.
interesting to see as well. Um, well,
Well, the figures are actually staggering. I mean,
mm,
the figure that's quoted in the articles about around this are $30 million in
mm,
terms of committed to actually acquiring this stuff,
mm,
and just the sheer quantity. Just this latest cache that's being returned, 5,000 papyrus fragments
mm,
and 6,500 fragments of clay artifacts.
mm.
You know, um, it's it's like somebody buying the storeroom of the British Museum.
Well, it is, and to be honest, in that sense, I have to ask. Well, not even have to ask. I'm amazed that there's that much money in arts and crafts. If you sort of,
Well,
do you know what I mean?
actually, a few weeks ago we had the report on the fact that some of their key artifacts that were on display are actually forged. So you could argue that they've actually been subsidising craftspeople in the Middle East.
Oh. I like it. I like what you did there. Very good. So I see. So actually, uh, you, you should email them right away. You should be on their PR team. That's great spin. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've been at the forefront. Hobby Lobby
of
says
employ- of
of
employing.
employing and cultivating the skills of Middle Eastern craftspeople. I love it. Yeah, we should do. Yeah, you should do that. Um, yeah,
Even, come on, Mark, even I've got some ethics. You know what ethics is, don't you?
uh, is it somewhere east of London?
That's right. It's the yes, it's the county just to the just to the north of. Uh,
But this is actually this story. We should say this story we've bundled in with a few other related stories to do with museums and their collections. For a start, there's a very interesting um, headline from the Africa Daily News, New York. Stolen crown returned to Ethiopian church. This is, I believe, the story of an this over a museum in the Netherlands returning a crown to Ethiopia from their collection. This month also we happen to have had stories from, for example, the National Post. Indigenous experts call for a return of countless treasured belongings held in museums, along with an essay, an opinion piece essentially written by Dan Hicks of The Guardian, entitled "Will Europe's
yeah.
Museums Rise to the Challenge of Decolonisation?" And the reason why we I guess you've got this a very visible and very um, easily humorous story from the Hobby Lobby, especially if you've got a bit of Schadenfreude going on, and or you just need a bit of a
Heaven
giggle.
forbid.
Heaven forbid. Um, but
Sorry,
also
sorry.
there are genuine related issues in terms of collections. in many museums in Europe, in America, so on and so forth. The Indigenous experts calling for countless treasured belongings held in museums um, to be returned story, though, interestingly, has seen a bit of a backlash. I'm still, I don't know about you, but I'm still seeing archaeologists and historians often who I think should know better, saying that, for example, but museums in Africa simply can't handle these collections. If we return them, then we're returning them to war-torn countries. And what's interesting is when you actually look into the country that's requesting, often that country is politically stable. They haven't had a civil war recently. They haven't got a famine. There's this characterization of a continent, in particular in the case of Africa, and returning objects, which is still not helpful in these
Oh,
conversations. So the idea of museums
yeah.
keeping it for Africa's own good is, I think, it's an outdated, or at the very least, it's an excuse that needs to be examined on a case by case basis. I think, surely.
That was that's along the lines of the defensive empire. That, oh, yeah, we bought them law courts and
Yeah.
schools, and we what have the British ever done for us? Uh, they bought peace. Peace? No, they didn't.
Peace.
They enslaved us and ripped off our resources.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just been looking. I mean, as you know, I've got a particular interest in Myanmar, Burma,
Hmm.
and just a piece of work I was doing in the last week. I was looking at the colonial economy,
Hmm.
where it was geared to the export trade
Hmm.
under the British. It was 75% of the world's teak supply, millions of tons of rice that were being exported to India,
Hmm.
and latterly oil.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's what you know. It was an economic transaction, and the transaction was mostly one way. So
Hmm.
there are issues that need to be addressed there,
Hmm. Do you
and people
think,
need to
though,
realize that.
just briefly, because obviously, again, we keep on threatening to have a special at some point where we talk about
And
museums,
we should, and we
and we
should.
really should. But just briefly, do you think that uh, sorry, I'll rephrase this. So, for example, in the case of the Parthenon marbles,
Mhm.
I've heard it said that if we
As
had,
purchased by Lord Elgin.
yes, the
Allegedly.
so-called Elgin marbles, the Parthenon
Yeah.
marbles, uh, some people make the argument, had he not done that, they would have been destroyed, either through erosion or through active, pot shots being made by Ottoman soldiers for target practice, this kind of thing.
Or
It's,
sold off piecemeal to other people.
or sold off. Yes, exactly. There is an argument to be made for that.
Yeah.
But part of me wonders whether or not actually there is an argument to be made that actually in saving those statues, what we actually did was we artificially took away their took away their fate, if you see what I mean. And I suppose, to put it another way, if Greece decided during the Second World War that aspects of, say, the House of Commons or Buckingham Palace required safekeeping just in case they were exploded or blown up, would
Mm.
Britain have taken kindly to that? Now, obviously, it's different historical circumstances.
Yeah.
There's the
I
Ottoman
don't
Empire
think
and
you.
so on and so forth. You
Yeah.
can't directly
Yeah.
compare it, but you
No.
can make the argument that for example, St. Paul's Cathedral has had a history and a fate which led to large portions of destruction and rebuilding. And I wonder whether, taking those as little thought experiments, whether
Mm.
actually the argument that oh, we need to preserve this stuff, we need to keep it safe, and this museum over here isn't capable of looking after it, is arguably philosophically null and void to a certain extent, in so much as if if something belongs to that country and it can be shown to have been taken in a way which is not in keeping with ethical standards,
Mm.
we should acknowledge its existence, record its existence, return it,
Yeah.
and allow it to have its fate in that nation. Allow those people to look after
Right.
it for themselves. And this also, actually, I should also say, so it comes in the context, for example, of things like, say, the Mould Gold Cape, of a find from just up the road from where I'm from in Wales, that
Wales. Yeah.
that was drawn, through the irresistible gravity to the British Museum. And the
Mm.
same goes for recently. There was a gold. uh, rainbow necklace, or a big piece of
Yeah.
gold jewellery that was taken from Shropshire. I say taken
We're
from,
still,
sorry, that was
we're
found in Shropshire and has ended up in the British
yeah.
Museum. Yeah.
It's something we're seeing increasingly with portable antiquities scheme treasure finds,
Mm,
that local museums say that they can't afford to show
mm,
they can't afford to pay for these artifacts when they come up
mhm, mhm,
um, for disposal
mm,
through the PAS. Um, and so they do end up in the big national museums,
mhm,
or the biggest of the regional museums. So, for example, Staffordshire Halls at Birmingham,
mm,
or,
mm.
you know. Um,
But even that was a
Now,
close run thing. It has to be said. Even that wasn't certain. Yeah.
absolutely,
Mm,
absolutely. I'm sure in their heart of hearts, the British Museum would love to have it as another one of its attractions to go alongside the Sutton Hoo treasure from Suffolk. Now,
yeah.
to be fair to the BM, and I think people are often unfair to the BM
Yep. They
in
are.
this argument.
They are.
Um, there has been an ongoing program of loans to the new Sutton Hoo Visitor Centre Museum at the Sutton Hoo site,
Mhm.
so that some of those artifacts have been going back to Suffolk,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
they can be seen more easily by local people
Mm,
and visitors to the site where they were actually originally deposited.
mm,
Um, so that, and I think I don't think we can have a sort of year zero for magazine for these sort of magazine type museums
mm.
where you have a different thing on every page.
No.
That Enlightenment idea of a cross section of human creativity or activity. Um, you know, you, I think you have to have a clear idea of what you want to replace it with before you start to destroy it. You know, don't knock down the fence before you know whether you need to build another one.
Okay.
Don't knock down the storeroom before you need to know what you need to store in future.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's the debate that's not being had.
And actually, that's a very good thing to an excellent point to make in so much as so I don't mean to sound surprised there. Actually, that's pretty good. No, but in so much as you're right, uh, it sounds as though to a certain extent you agree that morally there's a very strong argument for returning lots of these artifacts.
In
It's,
certain cases,
but that's what I mean.
in cer-
For lots of
yeah,
these,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
But the
Yeah,
point is, it is case
it's
by case.
complicated.
It's complicated, but also more to the point, there is the mechanism of return and the function and purpose of these museums
Precise. Yeah, exactly.
across the world. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Interesting insight.
and also, I'm not a believer in national guilt. You and I aren't responsible for the fact that our ancestors in this country owned and exploited enslaved people. It's a regrettable fact of history,
Hmm.
but you and I aren't responsible for that.
No. No.
You
Well.
and I aren't responsible for the British Army going into Benin in the 1890s.
No. No. Well. No.
We,
No.
we, we, we have to come to terms with that and make a decision about how we relate to that,
Yeah.
but we shouldn't feel guilty about it.
Okay. No, I see what you mean. Yes, I do see what you mean. No, no. So I'm not. I don't. That's not being reticent. I think in a very literal way. Yes, I see what you mean. In so much as I cannot relate. In fact, in that sense, I cannot relate. If you want to talk about slave ownership, I cannot relate to someone who owns a slave. I have no idea what sort of person that would be. I don't even know what sort of society that would be. I recognise that it happened, and I recognise that there has to be a societal response. But that's not. It
And it's
shouldn't be.
still happening
Of,
in certain forms,
of
including
course,
possibly in parts of this country.
of course.
In terms of agriculture, certain
Yeah,
agricultural workers, nail bar operators, that kind.
yeah.
We all know the cases.
But the point is, rushing to rushing to decisions about these things isn't
Mm,
necessarily a good idea. Okay, as you say, this deserves its own its own special at some point. I
absolutely.
suppose what I would say, that the reason why I brought it up is that is essentially is also a defunct argument for the Hobby Lobby sucking up
Yeah.
fines from the Middle East just because it can afford to, just because even just because there's you could argue that there's a passionate belief that that they're required to. Um, uh, and it is one thing, but also even if they were making the argument, oh well, this stuff would have been destroyed if we hadn't, or would have been lost or something like that. That's not. immediately a valid
Yeah,
argument. No.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and actually, just throw one thing in at the end there. To be honest, having worked on cases like Sekhem Car
Mm,
from Northampton Museum and so on, I'm more concerned about the art and antiquities, commercial art and antiquities market
mm,
being used to basically store and in certain cases, and I'm not accusing whoever's bought Second Car of this, but in certain cases it's been shown launder money.
okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those that's actually perhaps as vital a question, and one that needs to be addressed just as urgently.
I agree. I agree. Also, I should just say, just for people at home, you may be noting a slight drop in image quality in terms of Mr. Brockman's feed. I think that might be linked with, at the moment, caps being loosened on internet speeds in
Bandwidth. Yeah.
bandwidth in this country. I think it's part of the everyone staying at home, so the internet is being spread a bit more thinly. So just
That's
just
yeah.
just just be aware of that, and obviously, well, as you say, we can't be guilt. I shouldn't feel any guilt over that because it's not within my control. But I
No.
can be aware of it and I can apologise appropriately.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think we have to say, like everybody, the internet service providers are trying to cope with unprecedented demand at unexpected times of day and all the rest of it.
yeah,
So, yeah, as
exactly.
Mark says, it's we're lucky to still be talking to each other, I think.
Well, we are, but also not to go back to COVID, but also we're very fortunate, are we not, to be able to do this, at any
Mm.
time. Never mind during during
Indeed,
lockdown.
yeah.
Yeah.